Hey guys, Eileen here from Homegrown Happiness. Welcome to my first video of 2020. I've been a bit M.I.A. lately, had a little bit of a break from posting on YouTube, and I'm surprised how much I missed it. I really like talking about my garden with like-minded people, so I'm glad to be back. But I took a little bit of a break because I'm working on something which, if you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or are part of my email list, you already know, but if you don't, I'm writing a book. So that's what I've been working on, and it's taken a lot of time, but it's been really fun. I'm really proud of everything that I've put in it so far. It's like my heart and soul is in this book, so it won't be published until next year, and it's not due until halfway through this year, but it's really going well now. I've written most of it, and it's since I'm doing all my own photography, I have to make sure that I take photos in time before I chop things down, so I don't want to miss any of the vital shots. First things first, it's autumn tomorrow, which means that the summer garden is coming to an end. Like, heaps of stuff is still producing and will do for months to come, but some stuff isn't, and then that needs to be cleared and make room for the autumn crops. So the first thing to go for me was my corn that's at the top garden. So I have two sets of corn, but this is one of them, and I took that down because it was finished, but the kumara underneath that is still growing. So when I remove any crops, I just chop them down at root level, and I leave the root ball in the soil because that's still a viable food source for the soil microorganisms, and it'll break down, especially if you cover it later on with some mulch or some compost. It breaks down super quick. So yeah, just chop the corn down, and then the actual corn stalks, half of it I chopped up, put it in my compost, and the other half I just left to break down in a pile. I didn't even bother chopping them. It'll take ages, but it's out of sight, so it doesn't matter. I'm just going to talk a little bit through what's growing in this top garden. I have a lot of celeriac that's looking really lush and green. We've had a bit of a non-summer here. Half of New Zealand has had like a drought. The South Island has had flooding, and then we have been kind of in the middle. Today is sunny now, but this morning it was pouring with rain, so we've had heaps of rain. So things are quite slow, but on the plus side, things are really lush and green. So I haven't had to water my garden pretty much at all this summer. And then coming here under my bean archways, we've been harvesting heaps of green beans. That's something that has not slowed down with the lack of sun, and we're eating heaps of them fresh when they're young, but I planted extra because I want to harvest heaps of them as dried beans this year. And then under the netting, this is where I have my first lots of my winter brassicas and autumn winter brassicas. I started these ones in December because the garden that they're in is a south facing garden, so it loses the sun pretty much entirely in winter, so I really wanted them to be like a big size before they lose the sun. So yeah, December sow and seed works really well, and then I do that every 2 weeks, so definitely not just a one-off plant and forget. I continue sowing pretty much all through autumn and winter. My seed trays, I have lots of tatsoi and pak choi and sprouting broccoli and Chinese cabbages and lots of other little brassicas, kale that I've started, and you can see different sizes, because every 2 weeks I do a little bit. That keeps the harvests manageable and continuous. I've also got some onions that I started and some peas. And these big plants here are my Brussels sprouts, and they were actually started even earlier than December. I start my Brussels sprouts in late October, and then they are definitely a big size for when winter comes. So they are no longer under netting. They were under netting, but they're really tall now. And yeah, the netting and the hoops that I have were too short, so they were getting a bit squashed. So I've taken the netting off, and it's really annoying because now I have to be really vigilant with removing eggs from the white butterfly, checking for caterpillars. So I'm going to try and make some sort of frame to put the netting back on that's taller than the hoops that I had. So my tomatoes have been really slow because of the lack of sun, but when they are starting to turn, I harvest them because the birds and my chickens are eating them this year quite a lot. So I've had a lot of half-eaten tomatoes. So now I'm just harvesting them and then letting them ripen on the bench. See, these beefsteak tomatoes were attacked by the chickens. They should be this beautiful, unblemished yellow, but I managed to grab the other green ones before they were bitten, so hopefully they will turn on the window. My Chilean guava bush is nice and full, and that's always a fun garden snack to eat while you work. So heaps of stuff is going to seed in the garden, and I'm letting a lot of that go, but only the stuff that I actually want to self-seed in the garden. So like my parsley, I am letting that one go to seed, and some of the seeds I'll save and store inside, but others I just sprinkle in the garden and wait for them to germinate. I do the same with lots of flowers like my marigold, and then this will give me some autumn flowers as well. And not all of them will germinate right now, like as the weather gets cold then the seeds won't germinate if the soil temperature isn't right, but then come spring when it warms up then they will, and that's just perfect. I don't have to think about it, they'll just come up automatically. Coming down the garden a little bit, in my November video I talked about how I wanted this area to be filled with a ground cover of strawberries, and that has happened. And I've also planted in lots of flowers that will self-seed, like these cosmos, and then so they've already set themselves out, and little new ones are growing. And then there's this garden as well. So this one is technically a lovely north-facing garden, but in the winter the hill that the top garden is on blocks the sun. So it's again one of the ones that are great in summer, good for part of autumn, and then winter it just completely loses it. But that's fine because I again now know that, and plant early enough so that I can combat the lack of sun. So this garden has first a huge tomato plant that's just gone nuts, and tomatoes on there that I will need to remove before the chickens eat them. And it has parsnips that I sowed in spring, leeks that were done in spring as well, celery. Celery is actually already over a year old, so that's looking a little bit worse for wear, but it's still hanging on, and I just use it for soups and stuff in stock anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's not beautiful. So in December this garden was still full of carrots, which I pulled out, and then in that place I've sown some more beetroot and some silver beet, and yeah, things that will once they hit their initial head start will be able to feed us when the sun goes. I sowed Swedes as well, and the white butterfly is enjoying the leaves of those, but at least the bulb underground won't get touched. Next to this garden I made in November or October a really quick no dig bed, like just dumped on manure and compost, and I planted my eggplants in there, and they are doing really well. Like, this is a really good variety, it seems, in my garden. It's called eggplant long purple. Along the fence here there were peas there in spring, and they will have dropped some seeds, so there's some little pea shoots that are germinating, which is great. Now coming down to my favourite garden, which is the front lawn, which gets the best sun, and it's just awesome. It's one that I set up in M.I.A, which I will link the video below, and really easy. It's no dig garden. I just laid paper and compost, and then I bulked it out with seaweed and some leaves and things like that, just because I'd never have that much compost to spread over such a big area. So anyway, the garden has done wonderfully. Look how lush and green it is. There's heaps of kumara here. There's zucchinis, strawberries, pumpkins, eggplants, chilies, flowers. Yeah, there's heaps. I also, a few months ago, sowed some carrots here, and again this garden bed is only from M.I.A, and no digging, just layering on organic matter. And I've just sown some carrots, and they need to be thinned, but when I pull one out you can see how nice and straight it is, even though there was no tilling of the soil. And I have really hard clay soil. If I left that bare and uncovered, it would crack and become like concrete. So it just shows what just layering on that organic matter and creating a a nourishing environment for the soil life actually does. And then I've got this other little front garden with the corn, and this is my second lot of corn, and that one did a lot better actually than my top garden, which is nice to know for next year. And then I have lots of things in pots, like some ginger and some fennel and my yams, so New Zealand yams / ochre. And because everything has been so wet here, we have powdery mildew everywhere on all my cucurbits have it, and downy mildew, which is a bit different but kind of similar. So yeah, it's pretty unavoidable anyway in the end of the season, these kind of fungal infections, but the fact that we had such a wet spring and a non-existent summer with lots of rain is just a breeding ground for fungus. And here is a little golden queen peach that I planted a guild around a few months ago, and I just wanted to show you that because it's doing really well. I have a whole heap of plants around. The guild plants create like a symbiotic relationship with the tree, so they provide things like pest control, ground cover, they conserve moisture, things like that. All the plants work together. So I've got strawberries, which are a great ground cover, and they have flowers to attract the bees. I have clover, which is a nitrogen fixer, and again flowers for the bees. I have purple basil and sage, which are pest deterrents with their smell, but then also can flower for the bees, and a watermelon and things like that. I also think it's really pretty, much prettier than the lawn, so I'm going to keep expanding it out. And then over the bridge here are more pumpkins, and so these are the ones that really have the downy mildew, which shows up at the start was like yellow spots on the leaves, and then after a while the leaves start browning off and then getting a little bit of a dusting of mildew on there as well. But it's nearly the end of their life, and I mean I removed the infected leaves when it was still earlier on in the season, but now I'm just leaving them, and when I'm ready to harvest the plants, then I will the pumpkins, then I will just take those leaves and then let them dry out and then burn them. I planted lots of yams here as well, like by the bridge, which was full of weeds before that and really hard to maintain, so I've just filled that with yams, and they're doing really well. Well, they look like they're doing really well, heaps of lush foliage. So in a few months time, in winter, I will harvest them and see how they go. So I think for this channel I'm going to start doing a lot more videos of where I forage for my food as well, because I don't grow everything here. I go to collecting people's excess of fruits and vegetables that they can't use. And so we eat a lot of that stuff, like for instance apples. My parents have heaps and heaps of apple trees, and every year I go and collect the majority of my apples there for apple sauce, dried apple chips, apple cider vinegar, all that stuff. They also have chestnuts, which are I love, my favourite nut. So yeah, that's where I get those from. My in-laws have quinces, heaps of quince trees, which are great to preserve, and olives that I go get at the start of winter. Yeah, so there's quite a few wild plum trees around here, and pear trees and apple trees, and so I do a lot of looking around my area and asking people if they have any excess, and that's where a lot of our food comes from as well. So I think I want to start showing more of that side, not just what's grown in this little garden. Like obviously a majority of our food is grown here, but it's definitely not the only source. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.